Welcome to The Art of Adventure. This is episode 293 with Molly Hurford. The Art of Adventure is the podcast where we look at human potential, entrepreneurship, unconventional lifestyles, and cutting-edge science. I'm your host, lead explorer, and guide, Derek Loudermilk. You can check out derekloudermilk.com for the show notes for this episode. Now, really quick, I want to tell you about the League of Superconductors. That is a small group business mastermind that I am hosting this year, and the doors are open right now in February 2020. And if you are a thought leader, if you have a mission and you're helping teach that to people so that you can change the world, so people like coaches, speakers, influencers, authors, retreat hosts, this mastermind is for you. And it's going to help take your business to levels you've never thought possible, into the multiple six figures if you're not there already. But it's also going to help you master the personal skills that you are going to need to really lead a movement. So these things are like self-expression, your marketing, your sales, your storytelling, charisma, confidence, all these pieces that you'll really need to be a leader. I invite you to apply if it sounds like something that you are interested in. If this is your role, if this is your path in life, you can head over to derekloudermilk.com under the coaching tab and you can apply for the league. All right, today's episode with Molly Hurford. Molly was a guest way back when we started the show. It's been a few years since I've connected with her. She was a really popular episode when she was first on, and I brought her back on because so many people ask me about sponsorship. How do I get sponsored? And there's a dream of, right, a company giving you free stuff to go and do cool adventures. It's going to be amazing. And Molly has written a book called The Athlete's Guide to Sponsorship. Now, this covers not just athletes, but also covers your influencer side of things, social media side of things. So this episode, she's gonna tell you all about the relationships that you need to build to get sponsors. We're going to talk about the difference between local and national sponsors. Molly has, she's a racing cyclist. She's a writer, an author, a coach. She coaches younger athletes. She's run pro cycling teams. She's managed team and personal sponsors. She teaches cycling workshops all around the world. She lives in multiple different countries. So she's really a great person to have written this book and to be here talking about this. We're going to talk about, how to over-deliver value for your sponsors so that you can maintain these long-term sponsorships. We're going to talk about when you should pay for something, just pay for it out of your own pocket instead of taking the time to go after sponsorships. There's a cost benefit here. So how do you know when to go after sponsors? And then, of course, one of the most important parts is the actual pitch. How do you propose the sponsorship relationship and what is going to be the value exchange? So Molly and I, we're going to both bring our expertise into this conversation to help you get sponsors. So you're really going to get a ton of value out of this episode. Please enjoy this interview with Molly Hurford. Molly Hurford, welcome back to the podcast.
Oh my gosh, thanks so much for having me. I can't believe how long it's been.
I've heard people say time is speeding up. I don't know if that's relative or what's going on, but yes, it's been 5 years. You were one of the first guests on the show, and you've done so much since then. I don't know if we're gonna cover it all.
I doubt it. Yeah.
Well, partly, I want to talk to you about your new book, The Athlete's Guide to Sponsorship, which is super perfect because people are emailing me all the time being like, how do I get sponsored? I want to do this trip or I want to do this thing. So it's a question on a lot of people's minds that I think maybe there's some misconceptions about sponsorship or how easy it is or when you should do it. But I love just a little. Maybe we can start with like, what's your experience with sponsorships? Do you have sponsors right now? And why did you write this book?
Yeah, so it's very multifactorial. A big part of why I wrote this book was I work a ton of different jobs. I've been really lucky to have a very varied career. And so a few of them have been, I've always been a journalist writing about athletes, basically endurance athletes, whether it's runners, triathletes, cyclists. At the same time, though, I've also done some cycling coaching. So I've helped coach camps for kind of all ages and all talent ranges, we'll say, and a lot of junior development camps. So working with younger athletes who are kind of on the precipice of being out of the junior rankings and thinking about sponsorships. And I've also managed a couple of professional teams and traveled with them and, worked through contracts with them and spoken to sponsorship coordinators and all of that kind of stuff. And honestly, the biggest impetus for writing the book, it started as almost a burn book to some extent, like Mean Girls style, where I was coaching these development camps and I was getting super frustrated seeing some of the mistakes that these young athletes were making and, seeing very clearly why they were having trouble finding teams and, what they were doing wrong, for lack of a better word. So I kind of started, because it's my nature to write things, just writing these grumpy little missives about what they were doing wrong. And it just kind of went from there as I got more and more into the industries and talked to more and more sponsorship coordinators who were, just kind of bemoaning the lack of, honestly, common sense in a lot of cases around, how athletes go about getting sponsored. I ended up putting together this book over the course of years from working in all of those different positions. I've been lucky enough. I also have raced a ton and, whether it's biking or triathlon or running, I've done sort of everything. And I'm lucky enough right now that I'm working with just a couple of brands that I really like, that I'm excited about. I try to keep my sponsorship stuff to a minimum because as a journalist, you want to be pretty able to be objective and try all these different things. So right now, my main one is actually I work with Champion Systems, the custom kit designers, and actually just got my first batch of custom Shred Girls kits for the new year, and I'm super excited about that. That's kind of my how we got here.
And for the listener, this is super cool. Shred Girls is a fiction series that you're working on, which I just found out about, which is really awesome.
Thank you. Yeah. My middle grade fiction Babysitters Club-esque series for getting girls on bikes.
That's super rad. And so what were some of these common mistakes that you saw that you started writing these little bits about?
Well, the big thing is really just kind of assuming that you get one decent result and the world owes you something. And I mean, honestly, I've been guilty of this, and I think it kind of extends outside of sport, right? Like you write one great thing, you get one viral tweet or Instagram, you make one video that gets a lot of hits, and you suddenly think that you're owed opportunities. Oftentimes, even with my career as a writer, people are always like, oh, how do I get your job? And it's like, well, you work really freaking hard for a lot of years. And that's how you get it. I've been doing this for, 16 years now.
Yeah, I definitely remember when I was younger, I had that sort of, I wasn't even that good. I wasn't winning like real big races even. I was just like, if I'm a Cat 1, which for the listener, that's, pretty good cyclist. Then I was like, the free shit should just be flowing in.
Exactly. Yeah. And honestly, it's funny because even after writing this book this year, I, won a couple of ultra running races and was kind of like, wait, where's my shoe sponsor? Why don't I have people sending me pairs of shoes? And I was like, oh, right. I have not earned that. No one owes me anything. So the big thing is really just kind of this understanding that honestly, when you're looking for sponsorship, what you're asking companies to do is employ you. You are doing a job hunt. You are trying to become an employee of someone. But for some reason, we get it very much in our heads that to be a professional athlete or influencer, whatever you want to call it, it's this level of, you're the person that they should be coming to and begging to work with you and stuff. And even at the highest level, that's just not the case.
Maybe we could talk about how sponsors think, how they would want to work with an athlete or an influencer.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the best way to put it is maybe just okay, you won your local bike race or you won your local 5K. What good does that do for a sponsor? And as soon as you start thinking about that, what value does that bring to a sponsor? the value of you crossing a very tiny finish line wearing, let's say Nike shoes, that does almost nothing for a sponsor. However, so what sponsors are looking for is value for their brand, right? So, on the flip side, if I do this local race, but I've also run a couple of pre-runs that we're going over the course together. I've invited everyone who's doing the race. I've had the race promoter put it out that I'm running check out the course with a pro kind of thing. That's a time where I'm running with people and I can be like, oh yeah, and by the way, these sneakers grip the ground amazingly. Like they're fantastic. Everything's awesome about them. Like that's a value add. Maybe someone then actually goes out and buys a pair of Nikes or whatever shoe whatever shoe we're talking about here. That's a value add. But 20 people seeing me cross a finish line and then like dramatically collapse wearing these shoes, they're not going out to buy them. They don't care. So sponsors want to know what it is that you can actually bring to the table. What can you do for them? And frankly, very few of them actually care about you winning races unless you're actually winning an Olympic medal. And even that comes with some stipulations because the Olympics have so many brand issues with them and you're racing for your country. So brands don't actually love the Olympics that much, as it turns out.
Yeah, I always wondered about, like what Michael Phelps could get from, private sponsorships, like he's appearing on commercials and things like that.
Yeah.
I would imagine TV spots would pay pretty well.
Yeah, I think Michael Phelps is probably doing fine. And, when you've won that many gold medals, you're probably going to be doing okay, whether or not you can, race in your Nike Speedo. But for the rest of us.
Do you get paid? Like, do they get a bonus do they get a bonus for winning a gold medal or anything like that from the Olympics or from their home country or something?
It would totally depend, honestly. Like different countries would have different situations. And even within the country, the cycling and the track and field and the swimming is completely really unrelated to each other. So USA Cycling might have a bonus structure in place for the cyclists, but I couldn't say the same for honestly even road versus mountain bike.
I bet the Russians pay their athletes a lot for medals.
Yeah. They're all going to be getting $0 at this upcoming one then.
Okay, so yeah, so then now that so results, they're not as important as maybe we're thinking they are for the sponsor. They're super important for us still, but for the sponsor, they don't make that big of a difference. So you mentioned actually going out and sort of talking with people and word of mouth about the shoes. What other ways do sponsors get value from someone?
Yeah, I mean, the obvious one in today's landscape is going to be social media. Even that, it's a little bit tricky if you don't have, thousands and thousands and thousands of followers. Obviously, that makes things difficult. But your value add is really the materials that you can bring back to them, whether it is social media posts or you're, writing an article for their website or putting a video together for their website about how one of the products work. I think a lot of people kind of forget that one of the things you can do is actually be giving them content back. So it's not even necessarily like, oh, I can post on my Instagram and I'm followed by 100,000 people. It's more, I can make this really great, Instagram video for you about how I used this product. And here's this really interesting way of doing it. So social media is kind of one of the obvious ones. Content is an obvious one. And I do think there's such a high value to the in-person stuff. Because if you actually think about what people are buying, Instagram and all of the influencer stuff, the sales and the actual conversions to products bought is pretty low, honestly. Most of us are just going to scroll past someone saying, this bike is the best. And you're like, yeah, I know. You race for them. Of course you think it's the best. It's probably not going to sway me that much. But if you're running a free local, mountain bike workshop where you're going to teach everyone how to bunny hop, or, you're leading a Saturday morning group ride, I'm much more inclined to go to that group ride and then be like, that bike is really nice. So I think never underestimating the value of those smaller local things that you can do. I think brands really are starting to look for that again. There was a time a few years back where everyone was just all over the like, but how many likes are you getting on your images and that kind of stuff. But I think now brands are starting to realize the in real life stuff is way more valuable.
Because they looked at the evidence and they saw like, wow, we're getting 1,000 likes and, only $200 in sales or something.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Okay. And so there's this sort of, I think you talk in the book about the athlete versus influencer sort of like, where you're prioritizing your efforts. Could you talk a little bit about that, frame?
Yeah, absolutely. So athlete is obviously going to be a lot more results focused, results driven, and what races you go to are going to matter. You really need to be strategic about making sure you're at enough smaller things that you have the, good results, that you have those first place finishes or the podium finishes. So that might mean going to your local, weekly criterium and winning that a few times, just so you can have some wins on your race resume, but then also making sure you're at some of the bigger events that are actually going to spotlight the athletes, that are going to get, in race magazines, that are going to be on Velo News, on Runner's World, that kind of stuff. And plus that way people can actually see, oh, that person is fast. They're not just fast locally. Always very important. So that's more athlete. Then the influencer side of things is, you might race, but it's not really what you do. What you really do is share your story with someone. So that's maybe more like you're a bike packer or you're really into bike touring. So instead of racing your bike, you're riding to all of these cool places and documenting it. And in that case, then yeah, your social content is going to be a lot more important, because that's actually, 90% of your value is in these stories that you're sharing online. Whereas for an athlete, a good chunk of your value is the fact that you are fast on your bike, but then you're also sharing it. So an athlete is an influencer, but an influencer is not necessarily an athlete, if that makes sense.
Okay, yeah. And so I'm thinking, there's a large portion of the population, including myself, whose natural talents can only take them so far. I didn't win any big national level races. So then it's like, oh, maybe I should just go for the influencer side of things to start with, because it's just a lot more hard work to try to just like go on results alone.
Yeah, I mean, that's probably the way a lot of people could be thinking about it, or at least be thinking about their value, right? Like, okay, I'm not going to win national championships anytime soon. So what can I be doing that's going to actually make a company want to work with me? So yeah, I think that's a great way of looking at it. It's not that you can't be an athlete or that you can't be working towards that, but what stories can you tell along the way that are going to make you interesting to brands?
Yeah, maybe you'll hit the results before you even get there. You can be valuable.
Mm-hmm, exactly. Yeah, I mean, there's so many, the highest level racers that are, putting out great content. Like, if you can put out great content as an influencer and have great results as an athlete, that's what sponsors really, really want.
Sure. So then maybe let's talk about like different levels of sponsors. There's your local bike shop, your local running shop, your local, I think when I played Little League Baseball, like the local pizzeria, like put the name on the back of the jersey. So these are like the local ones. And then you've got, your Nikes and your international level. So there's different tiers. How do you, maybe you could start to tease apart, like how to look like for these different level sponsorships.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think all of us will totally admit that really, when you're first starting to dream big about your career, what you really want is those sponsorships from like your Oakleys, your Red Bulls, like the big companies, right? But ultimately, very few athletes are actually going to get sponsored by those companies. Like, let's be realistic here. And the best way to get, say, Oakley sunglasses is probably going to be figuring out that back door in, which is going to be like the local shop. So a lot of people turn their nose down at like the local sponsorships, whether it's, free massage or, a local bike shop is going to sponsor you and give you a bike. And I've seen this so many times where someone will get like a local bike shop sponsoring them and then get like a tiny thing where, say, Smith Sunglasses sends them a pair of sunglasses. And this is maybe my biggest pet peeve. And then that person will go and spend the entire season talking up their Smith sunglasses on Instagram, like posting about them constantly, and just kind of like forget about the local bike shop that provided them with a bike and shoes and a helmet and kit and all of these things, because the local bike shop isn't as sexy as saying that you're sponsored by the huge company. But really, the value that a local bike shop can give you is so huge. So I think that's a really great place to start, is these smaller shops. They're probably not getting hit by the million applicants that Oakley is getting hit by. B, you can actually do a lot more value-wise in the community very easily. So it's a lot simpler to kind of present that value add where you're like, well, I can actually hold a night at the shop or a ride that leaves from the shop a couple times a year. So it's a lot simpler to put together a really good proposal when you're talking about local businesses. And I mean, honestly, it's also kind of a sneaky backdoor into getting to that Oakley sponsorship at some point. If the shop has Oakley, that means they have an Oakley rep who comes in and talks to the shop owner. If the shop owner is really happy with you, he might be able to mention you to the rep, who can then mention you to, his boss, and so on and so forth. So now when you apply to Oakley 2 years later, they've already heard about you because you've done such awesome things for this bike shop.
That reminds me of this really lucky experience I had working at a giant shop that had giant bikes. And I was actually, moving from St. Louis to Colorado, and the rep got me a job at the new shop where I was moving to, because they both sold giants. And he was like, oh, I know this shop, I'll introduce you. So before I even went out there, hopped on the call, they were like, oh, you already work at the shop. Okay, great. Like, you can have a job right when you arrive. And it was amazing, right? These relationships with the brands could be super valuable.
Yeah. And that's not luck, though. That's you actually were working at this shop and were chatting with the rep and actually making a really good impression on the rep and, making this name for yourself with him so that when you were moving, he wasn't just like, oh, yeah, that kid that I never spoke to in the shop. Like, why would he help why would he help you if you hadn't presented him with, you're a valuable asset to the shop there? Why wouldn't you, of course you're going to be valuable in this new place. So
let me tell a little bit more about that story, because so for people listening, how I did that was I actually, every time this guy was in town, I would make sure that he had a bike to race on, and I would take him to the Tuesday night races. So he liked to bike race, but he was traveling all the time, so he didn't really get to race and wasn't bringing his bike all the time. So it was actually, it was like just a few miles from the shop. So I'd make sure to like ride him there and make sure he got entered in the race and could do these local Tuesday night races. So I wasn't thinking strategically about it at the time. I was just thinking like, this guy likes to race. Let me help him because I like to race also. But that probably, now that I think about it, was really probably significant for him to have someone thinking about it. So yeah, for sure, he's going to like do what he can to help.
Exactly. Like, it always pays to be nice to people, for sure. And I mean, the flip side is 100% true as well. So when I was working as a team manager, I would do, it's kind of a weird story, but like I ran a lot because it's hard to ride when you're traveling with a team because you're on the road all the time. It's way easier to throw on running shoes and just get out for a run. So I would do that usually at the race venue because, it's the only time of day when they're on the course training that I could get out and sneak in a run. So I'd be out running. And I remember this one kid, I was, just out in full black, like very like, incognito, we'll say. And this one kid who had coached at a camp at one point, yelled at me really rudely to like get out of his way or something. And I'll say I was not in the way. Like, this kid was just kind of being a jerk. And when his application came in for our team later that year.
Oh, yeah.
Guess where that went?
Yeah, he probably had no idea.
No, yeah. He probably had no clue that it was me running. Like I said, I was wearing, hat, long sleeves, long pants. But if he had been polite to me, I probably wouldn't have chucked his application. But that was just like, oh, okay, he's not going to take the 2 seconds to like, be polite to me. Therefore, I am not going to give him, the same courtesy. So yeah, it goes both ways.
Yeah. So let's see. The people listening, may not be like in the endurance world. Actually, the last interview I did was with Chase Beringer, and he did a motorcycle trip trying to set a world record, and he was getting sponsors for the trip. He decided, instead of paying for the trip himself and just sort of hiring everyone, he wanted to go the sponsor route. I think partly just to get people involved and have it feel like a community behind this endeavor, this expedition. So the question, I guess, is you could just, buy your own bike and sunglasses and stuff. So when does it make sense to actually try to get sponsors?
It's a tough one because it's going to vary for a lot of people, right? Because for some people, buying the bike might actually be an impossibility, right? Like we tend to forget biking is really expensive. Running, you can pretty much get away with for quite a while before you really need a sponsor. But cycling can be really tricky if you're, not wealthy enough to just kind of spend a couple grand on a bike. So I don't think it's ever too early to start looking for sponsors. It takes a lot of guts and I'm going to say a lot of balls to show up when you don't really have a lot of results and, be trying to get a sponsorship. And in that case, you really better have a lot of value beyond just like, I might do well once I start racing. But I don't think there's really any timeline on it necessarily. I would say the less results you have and the less, followers and the less content that you have kind of ready to go, the smaller scale you should try. Like that's where you might want to actually try to, go to a bike shop and trade some labor for a small scale sponsorship. Like that might be the way to go about it. But yeah, really thinking about your value before you go into it. But like, it's not really, because sponsors don't care about what you need. They care about what you can bring to the table. So
yes. Yeah. And, also in that question was, what's the best use of your time? So like, yeah, bikes are expensive, but sunglasses are less expensive. And so, for example, sometimes I will, when we're traveling, pitch to stay at a boutique hotel, and it's the off season, and they give us a great, maybe it's like a $250 room, and we stay there for a couple of nights, and they get some great marketing out of it, but it doesn't really cost them that much. But sometimes I pitch a lot and don't get anything. So I've just spent, a few hours of time investigating and making these pitches, and it doesn't lead to anything. So in that case, it would have been a better use of my time just going and earning some money and and buying a hotel. So it's these trade-offs, because really, like, even if you get a free bike for the season, it kind of depends on how much of your time you could be putting in there, or you could just, go try to earn some more money, which is another way.
Definitely. I think it's a tough call there because it totally depends on your circumstances. For someone, for me, it's okay, I could write another article, but for someone who's working a, minimum wage job or is trying to travel for their racing, then it can be really tricky to kind of figure out where that balance is. But I think that's such a huge thing is a lot of people will chase this idea of being sponsored because the idea of being sponsored is really what they want. It's not even necessarily that they want or need the stuff. It's the idea of being able to say that they have sponsors. And I think that's actually like a pretty major mistake that people make is this, kind of weird just seeking and seeking and seeking of sponsors for the sake of almost more validating yourself versus really thinking about what it is that you need to, make your racing go better or to make your life better. A long list of sponsors will not actually make you happier, as it turns out. It's just going to be a lot of stuff that you have to do. Because once you get one, you're not done.
I think you're right in the sense that, if a sponsor says, yes, we want to sponsor you, then it's almost like, we're choosing you, we're picking you, like, and you feel, and maybe if your parents aren't super supportive, but then you're like, okay, but my sponsor is supportive. Gosh, now I feel great about what I'm trying to do in the world. Really interesting, subtle psychology going on there.
Yeah, it's fascinating once you start getting into it. And again, that's again where I see like I want the Oakley sunglass sponsorship versus I want the local bike shop that will give me pretty much everything that I need. But the big brand just comes off as cooler somehow.
Yeah, I think people joke about sponsoring yourself. You know, you just show up with your nice stuff and be like, yeah, my sponsor got this for me. It's pretty sweet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
Okay, my wife got this for Christmas.
Yeah.
So let's talk about approaching and getting in touch with sponsors. You know, I mentioned, you know, sometimes I'm emailing hotels before I go to a place. So we talked about also that guy that got me the job at the bike shop. He's the rep. What are the ways in where you first can start a conversation with a sponsor?
Yeah, well, the first one is always look on their website and see if they have some kind of sponsorship application or information. Because let me tell you, the most irritating thing in the universe for, you know, a marketing coordinator or something is when they have all of the how-tos listed and people just ignore that and, you know, are emailing or are Facebook messaging the person directly, even though there's already a system.
Did that happen to you? They message.
The number of Facebook messages I've gotten when I was like managing a team and stuff like that was honestly bananas, and it drove me absolutely insane because pro tip for everyone out there, people's Facebooks, that's not the place. The brand's Facebook, okay, sure. Like absolutely that's fair game. But people's personal Facebooks, that's off limits. That's what LinkedIn is for. That's what even like Twitter and Instagram are better for that. But like, please let people have a personal life. It's really frustrating to go on your Facebook and have like 8 messages from.
Were these junior teams or development teams that you're talking about?
No, running? I worked for a pro team, and then I worked with a couple of developmental teams. So kind of a little bit of everybody, really.
Okay.
But the thing is, my email, super easy to find. Like every other contact for me, super easy to find. I'm not that hard to find on the internet. So to Facebook message me is just lazy, frankly. When everything says, here's my email, get in touch. And that's actually probably the second thing is do your homework. Don't just email the info at or like use the contact page on a brand's website. Really try to look into who it is that you're trying to get in touch with. And LinkedIn is great for this. You can, you know, ask around. A lot of the times, most of us in the athletic world are the 6 degrees to Kevin Bacon kind of thing. Like, so start doing your 6 degrees to whatever company you're trying to get to. You probably know someone who knows someone who knows someone who's sponsored by someone who knows the marketing coordinator for XYZ brand. So trying to kind of use your own network as it is to score an introduction can work a lot of the time. Like you might not think about it, but if you actually start going through your close circles, you can usually find a connection. And that's going to be a lot easier than just reaching out to the generic info at email. So yeah, that's sort of the start. And then when you do first make the initial email, I spend a lot of time in the book talking about emails because I've gotten some real doozies. I'm not going to lie. Man, spell check. Spell check is everything. Like, let me just start there. Having the correct brand in your email is probably the other huge one. I've had so many younger people email me about the team that I was working for with another team's name in the email body because they hadn't thought to like find and replace, and they were just sending these blanket like team applications to everyone. Yeah. Which is, I'm going to say, probably one of the worst things you can do. I think when you're approaching a sponsorship, yeah, okay, you're absolutely going to have to email a bunch of people. Like we're not all going to get our first choice. We're not all going to get that first email is not going to get a response 5 minutes later. But the mistake that people make is this blanket, you know, super kind of crappy, like generic letter that's like, I think you should sponsor me because XYZ, period. Like nothing about the brand, nothing about why you want to work with the brand or what you love about them or anything like that, or what you can do for them for that matter. Just a little bit about you and why you're great. And then send that, you know, blind copy to 30 different places. That's not going to get you a sponsorship. What's going to get you something is sending 1 or 2 really thoughtful emails per day or per week or however you have time for this that are, here's what I love about you. Here's why I've followed the brand for a while. Here's why I want to work with you. Here's what I can bring to the table for you. And then a little bit about yourself. That's going to work a lot better.
Gotcha. So you're saying consistent emailing, potentially, regular emails to a brand,
Consistent,
rather than just
thoughtful,
a single pitch.
Yes, and just not blanket emailing everyone all at once with the same generic ask. Like, you can absolutely follow up with brands and everything, but just please don't start with like, I'm going to send out 60 sponsorship applications today and not really change much from application to application. Really know what the brand is, what they stand for, why you want to work with them, and tailor your application to that. Don't just, send out one paragraph about how great you are.
Cool. And I think you mentioned the marketing coordinator was the person, like the position you're trying to find in order to talk to.
Yeah, so it's a lot of the time it's listed as marketing coordinator, advertising coordinator, sponsorship coordinator for some of the bigger places. And no one is going to be upset if you email like a slightly sideways person. Like if you email the wrong person, you email their head of PR or something like that. As long as you just say, hi, I'm hoping to get in touch with someone about sponsorship. I'm not sure if that's you or not. If it isn't, if you could please pass this on or let me know the correct email, that would be great.
Yeah.
People generally want to help you. And you can send to the info at emails, but just make sure you've done your homework and looked around the website first and tried to find the correct email before you send that like generic, hello, I need help email.
Yeah. And so let's talk about emailing versus calling, because sometimes I'll call and I'll say, maybe you can help me, who's the marketing coordinator, and they'll just be like, oh, here, I'm going to connect you. And you're like, oh, wow, all right. And then maybe they say, okay, cool, thanks for calling, send me an email. Or maybe they'll have time to hear you right then. What are your thoughts on like calling to try to talk to someone directly and introduce yourself versus starting with email? Which feels probably safer.
That sounds terrifying. I'm going to be totally honest here. I think that's a great strategy, but only if you're a well-spoken individual who is not going to panic and freak out when an actual human picks up, which doesn't happen very often. Like, let's be realistic. You're probably going to get sent a voicemail like 9 times out of 10. But that human connection, like that can be a hugely powerful tool. So if you're comfortable doing that and you aren't going to kind of stammer and be super awkward as soon as the person picks up, then that's great. That's an awesome tool. And I mean, if they say email, then perfect. Like, they're going to actually look at your email. In that case, though, unless you're really good at this, I would honestly have written out a script before I called that basically had like every possibility that could happen, whether it's like person picks up, like ask to be connected to the correct person, like write out how you're going to say that, write out what voicemail you would leave if you get sent to his voicemail box, or even write out like a little basic script of like what you want to ask if you suddenly hear someone be like, hello, what is it?
Yeah. Once you write that out, and I've definitely done that for various occasions in my life. Once you do that a few times, you won't need the script anymore. But yeah, it can be super helpful at first, because if you forget your name or why you're calling or something, then you're just like, oh, here it is.
Exactly. And I mean, honestly, that way you're also more in charge of the conversation and you're leading it a bit more versus that, kind of almost asking them why you called.
Sure. And so you talked a little bit about making sure you know the product well and doing your homework and that kind of stuff, contrasting with like sending out 60 applications in a day. Like, you probably don't know all those products equally well. I've had good success, at least like going farther down the process by saying like, I've used your brand for 10 years. Here's the products that I use regularly. And I already sort of talk about them. And that sort of seems to open the conversation up a little bit more.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's funny. So many people are unwilling to kind of promote products that they're not getting for free. But really, I mean, most of the stuff that I talk about is stuff that I'll I have bought, or at least have bought in the past, and love. Because I mean, why would I want to be sponsored by some brand that I don't necessarily like or wouldn't really use if I wasn't getting it for free? Like, I'd really rather just use the stuff that I like. So I think that's actually that's a great, easy value add. If you can email the company and say, I love this product. I've been using it for a long time. Here's the Instagram I just did of me using this stuff. And here's like my favorite piece. And I thought, XYZ detail that you added in 2018 was awesome. That stuff really goes a long way with companies because they're so used to getting these generic form applications from so many people. To have someone that actually has done their homework and truly loves the product, like that's what a company is looking for, is someone that can talk about the product and actually sell it to you. And the way you can sell it is if you genuinely love it. So that helps so much. And ultimately your cost is not going to be that great in this case. Like, you're still just buying stuff that you would use anyway. So good investment.
Yeah. Whenever I'm in town, I like to speak at the local REI, and I first got that sort of standing offer to come do workshops there by sending a picture of my round the world travel luggage, and it was like REI shorts, REI bag, REI, all this stuff. And I was like, look, I'm going to be talking about your brand in the store while I'm doing this workshop, and people will probably go and buy the stuff right then and there.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, it builds trust even with your audience too. If you're not suddenly going to start talking about this random brand of cricket protein or something that you just got sent. You've been talking about products that you really love. Like, I'm evangelical about bib shorts with cycling, and I love Veloccio's bib shorts. Like, I will talk about them all night and all day. Does not matter. Like, I would pay for them 100% of the time, like no problem. And that makes me a better person for them to work with, because they know that I've put my money where my mouth is. They know I will shout it from the rooftops that bib shorts for women are amazing and a game changer. Side note for cyclists, bib shorts. Think about it.
It's reminding me of Tim Ferriss, who hosts the Tim Ferriss podcast, an author and podcaster.
Never heard of them.
Yeah. So probably most people know or even listen to his show, but he did an experiment where he took away sponsors for a while and was doing a subscription model where you would just donate a certain amount. And the main feedback he got was they said, please bring back the sponsors. We rely on you, Tim, to recommend new products that, we believe you've carefully vetted these products, and you're only going to be recommending ones that we should look into. So I thought that was a really interesting insight that, people are like looking to these, in this case, a sponsored podcast to tell them, like weed through all the new products and tell them like, these are the good ones.
Yeah, exactly. Because people actually believe that he is vetting the stuff, right? Like, they don't think that he's just throwing a ton of sponsors up just for the sake of making money. So he's developed that level of trust with his listeners. And I think that's something that all of us can be doing even before we're, getting the big bucks or getting the free swag or whatever. Like, it's actually, before you get sponsored, is a perfect time to be establishing trust with your audience and sharing the stuff that you do love. It might help you find sponsors later, or it might just help someone else figure out, the brand of tights that work really well for them. So either way, you're doing a good service. Yeah.
You're adding value to the whole, no matter whether it ends in a deal or not. Yeah,
exactly.
I like that approach. I'm curious about the difference between, like an individual going after individual sponsors and you like running teams. I don't know if you went after sponsors or worked with sponsors as part of running the team, but like, what's the difference for a team versus an individual?
Yeah. So when you come onto a team, you're pretty much coming onto the whole host of sponsors that they have, which can be really great because it usually kind of ticks all of your boxes. The downside, obviously, then is, a team contract is going to have stipulations that might say you can't go after individual sponsors or you can't go after these certain types of individual sponsors, which can be, can kind of be a little tricky if, you aren't necessarily getting paid a lot to be on that team. Like, let's be honest, cycling, running, triathlon, not really the highest paid athletes in the world. So you're probably going to need to seek some individual sponsors as a team member to, pay your bills or, make a decent salary. So really the biggest difference is just a team is probably going to have multiple sponsors, and it's going to be a bit more complicated because you're going to be signing a contract for the team, and the team has individual contracts with the different sponsors.
So, and the team sponsorships are negotiated by the team management structure.
Yeah, exactly. So you're just not really going to have a lot of contact with the actual team sponsors, which, can be, it's fine if all you want to do is race. It's a little bit less fine if you're then hoping to kind of go out on your own because you're less likely to get to actually talk to those sponsorship coordinators and really develop those relationships. So if you are on a team, though, it's not impossible to do that. And I've actually seen this happen on a couple different teams that I've, worked with and watched, where individual team members, one of them would be really good at sort of that connection thing that we were talking about before with the giant dealer, chatting with anyone who came by the team tent or really making sure to even send a thank you note or sit next to one of the sponsor type people at any dinners that they would be at and stuff like that. Whereas the other guy on the team would be, more like hiding in the corner, like on his phone doing whatever during when the sponsorship guy is stopping by to say hello or drop stuff off or whatever. And then when they left the team, guess who got offered the individual sponsorship with those companies?
Right.
Not the guy in the corner on his phone. It was the person who actually went above and beyond and out of her way to meet the people who were going to be later looking to possibly hire someone else once that team was over or once she left the team. So you kind of always have to be thinking about your next steps, whether that's a year down the line or 2 years down the line, when you're making these relationships. It's all a relationship game, honestly.
It's pretty hard to sort of imagine that exactly how all this will pay off in the future. But you see a lot of these guys, they may get really great corporate positions after they retire if they've done well sort of with the relationships throughout their sporting career.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, if you actually sit down and you talk to a lot of reps or dealers or the sponsorship coordinators, honestly, a lot of the time you find that they were pro racers back in the 70s or 80s or 90s that have since shifted roles. So they're also just really fun to talk to as a side note. Like a lot of them have crazy stories about racing back in, the 80s as aero bars are starting to get invented and, all this great stuff. And frankly, if the best pro tip is let them tell those stories, let any rep, let any dealer, let any sponsorship guy, talk about the good old days because man, they love talking about the good old days.
Is there any difference in gender in men's and women's and how they approach sponsorships or some things are better at than others?
It kind of depends. It's shifting. And I think there's never been a better time for women to be going after sponsorships because companies are looking to make sure that they're expanding their, women's offerings and the women, their women's promotions. So in some ways, I would argue it actually is kind of easier for women to find sponsorships. But on the flip side, it's been such the field of endurance sport has been so male dominated for so long. And, still most of the businesses are largely run by guys that it's always going to be kind of a men's game, unfortunately, or it will be for the foreseeable future. But I don't know. It depends on how you want to look at it. Because for me personally, I wanted to be a sports journalist writing about running and biking. There aren't that many women in this field, and rather than seeing that as a downside, especially when I started, I think I could only name one other woman who was doing what I do. And I looked at that as a positive because it meant, okay, I'm going to at least stand out as I'm applying for these jobs and trying to get these articles, because I am different than the, 100 guys who are applying for this job or making this pitch. So rather than be bummed about like, oh man, there aren't that many women in this industry, I kind of looked at it as, okay, there aren't that many women in this industry, which means I can be one of the few women in the industry.
Yeah.
So
this is a great segue to talk a little bit about, because you do a variety of things. I'd love to get just a picture of where you're spending your time. So you wrote this book, The Athlete's Guide to Sponsorship. You had managed teams. You're an athlete. You mentioned teaching camps. What's the sort of picture of what you're up to?
Yeah, it's a lot of things. I still do a ton of freelance writing for Bicycling and Outside and a bunch of other places. So that's kind of one of my avenues. My husband and I run a podcast called The Consummate Athlete, where we talk kind of all about different sports and the different modes of being outside and stuff like that. I have the sponsorship book. I have the Shred Girl series. I have a few other books. I have some book proposals in the works. I run my website, The Outdoor Edit. I'm actually hosting a speaker series in our hometown in Ontario in the spring. So I've been kind of gearing up for that with the theater and getting all of that stuff together. And that'll be the first time I've done like an in-person, like big event like that. And before that, we're coaching a bunch of camps and clinics heading into it. Yeah, I do a lot of things, and it all kind of comes together into this life that lets us, my husband and I, be sort of all over the place and getting to ride with cool people and running cool spots and spend a lot of the day writing.
Yeah, amazing. Maybe you could share, if you're comfortable, like percentage-wise, where is your income coming from?
Ooh, that's a good question because it varies month to month. Like all of February, I'll be coaching a camp for that entire month. So that'll be, in that month, you could say coaching would be like 50%. And the books would probably be, 10, 15%. Freelance would be, again, depending on the month, it could be anywhere from 15 to 90%. Sponsorship type things, whether you're talking about like website stuff or podcast stuff or my own personal stuff, it's a pretty low percentage for me because it's not really where I put my time. I don't really send out a whole lot of sponsorship proposals, we'll say, because I'd rather be writing articles. And yeah, as we talked about earlier, you could spend hours crafting your pitches for sponsorships and, dealing with then what the sponsors actually want. And I've found for me, I'd rather be writing. Yeah. So, it's...
And what part of that feels like the most safe, and what part feels the riskiest?
Ooh, the safest is probably, if I'm being honest, it's the longest running places that I've freelanced for. So the, different magazines and websites that I write for that are, pretty big, pretty stable companies. Those are probably my stablest sources. And then coaching camps is getting to be a close second because that we've done so often now that we actually really know how to do them well and do them right and do them in a way that we know people are going to get a lot of value out of them. And we know how to actually work it so we don't end up broke as a result. The first couple camps and clinics definitely gave people a lot of value and probably cost us a lot of money. So we've learned a lot over the years. So yeah, those are probably the two most stable. And then we talked about this offline. Book stuff is always just going to be a giant question mark, which is very like exciting and fun. And it's always great when you're like, oh, good, I actually get like a decent royalty check this month. But it's never going to be, I don't think, unless Shred Girl hits like Harry Potter did, it's never going to be my 99% of income kind of thing. Yeah,
and it's definitely a long game. And if one of those books does hit it, right, and then everyone goes back like, ooh, I need to buy the whole series, you never know. But then you have this backlog right? And so maybe that doesn't happen until, I've heard of authors, right? Their 20th book is the one that hits it big.
Exactly.
But if I have a couple books that bring in like $200 a month, and
Exactly.
that's still fine. I'll take it.
Yeah, exactly. Like once you've written it, it's done. So it's sort of it's all kind of gravy, I guess, as the saying goes. Like, great, this month I get to put a little extra into the mortgage, and that's awesome. Yeah, and I mean, it's also with the books, like Shred Girls is great because it gave me this opportunity to, meet this new audience of younger women coming into cycling. And, with that, I have the Shred Girls website where girls can go for actual, like, practical information on how to get into riding. And, it's let me do a little bit more one-on-one coaching and, host a few more camps that are aimed at that target audience, like that,
Sure.
that age range. So it's not even I try to look at any project I take on as, okay, here's this project. Now, how can I make it fit into my life?
Yeah.
In all of the different puzzle pieces and ways.
And I imagine that sponsors would really like that story. They'd be like, oh, that's a really cool, that book series and the website, like they could get on board with that. So it may even make it easier to have those conversations.
Yeah, exactly. It's been actually like pretty comical because it hadn't occurred to me, that kind of stuff. And then I was starting to get, emails from really cool brands that I'm super psyched to work with, like Champion Systems, that were like, oh, we love what you're doing. Like, do you want to work together? And I'm like, oh, right. I'm doing a cool thing. That's cool.
Yeah. So actually, we haven't talked about this. The conversation so far has been about like you going out and getting sponsors, but now you're saying like they approached you.
Yeah, so this is a tricky one, and I have like a pretty long chapter in the book about a bit of a caveat around that, like what to do when they come to you. Because while sometimes it can work out, like I am super psyched with how this one has worked out, there's a lot of crap out there. And I think the best example of this is in Ontario, a lot of younger racers, I think it was pretty much just anyone who was on the provincial or the national level team, had gotten a message from this one brand that I'm going to say it was some kind of like cricket protein-esque type thing.
Okay.
I could not even tell you the brand if I tried. But they emailed pretty much everyone, and they wanted to send these kids basically this, protein powder or whatever it was. And in exchange, they wanted, I think it was like 10 Instagram or Twitter or whatever posts. And there were a fair number of kids who actually did it.
Mm-hmm.
But if you actually stopped and thought about that for like 2 seconds, a couple things here. One, it's kind of gross. Like, if you're super into it, then like awesome, more power to you. But like, I assure you, none of these kids were like already going in hard for cricket protein. No one was like, oh, I really love that product and I already buy it a lot, so of course I'd love a free sample. That would be fantastic. No, like none of them were using it. Second, I mean, I think it was like a $20 thing. Like this was not like a super expensive thing that they were getting for free. They were getting, probably what amounted to like $2 worth of action, like $2 wholesale worth of product here.
Yeah.
And the cost, which is putting not just like the time spent making these Instagram posts or whatever, that's already like, okay, a couple hours of your time. Sure. It's also the cost of your name and your reputation, because you're now going on Instagram and telling your, 1,000 high school friends or, the 500 people that follow you that you endorse this cricket protein powder and you think that this stuff is amazing and that they should spend their money and buy it. You only get so many of those asks before people are like, oh, this person is just willing to endorse literally anything. So you do need to be really careful when a brand approaches you. You need to ask like what it is that they have. Would you pay retail for it? I think is always one of the best questions you can ask. Is like, if they weren't offering this, if they were just sending me a press release or sending me like an advertisement saying, this is this cool new product, buy now, would I actually click buy now? And if you wouldn't, like that brand probably isn't really a great fit for you, and it's probably not worth doing.
Yeah, I'm thinking about, like bike brands. There's a lot of good bikes out there. So what do you think about that? It's like there's less of a risk of, like, oh, buy this one brand over the other, because they probably all have a good suitable bike. Whereas cricket protein, you're sort of like staking a claim, like, I'm into this alternative protein lifestyle.
Exactly. Yeah, for sure. And I mean, yeah, like as long as you're kind of dealing with one of the major bike brands or the major clothing brands or the major shoe brands, you're probably not going to have a problem. That in that case, it really is what they're offering actually worth it for me? And, that takes a little bit of thinking about. And I'll say if a major bike brand is coming to you, then it might be worth pausing for a second and thinking, is this the brand that I want to go with? Or should I reach out to another brand? Because if a brand is coming to you, it's probably because you're doing something right and might be able to, squeeze out a sponsorship with someone else.
Yeah, that's a good point. It could be a good indicator that, yeah, you don't have to go with the first person that asks you to dance.
Exactly. I mean, if you love that person and you really were hoping they'd ask you to dance, then by all means, get on the floor. But if that would be your like fourth pick, it might be time to reach out to the other brands and see if they want a tango or whatever.
Yeah, and there's always potentially, like, in negotiating, right? If you have offers, whether it's job offers or sponsorship offers or whatever, right? You're like, if something doesn't work out, right, and you have a good alternative, that's a powerful place to be. So it can be, if you have 3 good offers, you have a better negotiating position.
Exactly. Yeah. It's much easier to come to the negotiating table with, well, I have another option, not I really need this.
Yeah. Real quick, I'd love to, you were telling me a little bit before the show that you guys are going to spend some time in Spain this winter, and I'd love to just, maybe you could share with the listeners how you work that out.
Yeah. So, I mean, a big part of it, obviously, as we talked through what it is that we do, is that we can work remotely pretty much anywhere in the world. I write, we coach camps. You can do that from pretty much anywhere. So Girona in Spain is one of my favorite places. It's kind of a cyclist hub. If you train in Europe, you probably have trained in Girona. So it's a really awesome place to be. So I'll start with Girona is just awesome, and I really wanted to spend more time there. But also we're lucky enough that we live in a ski town, but don't ski. So during the non-skiing months, the town is perfect for us and has, every possible thing you could want. We're right on the water for water sports. We have tons of trails for mountain biking and running. The roads are amazing for biking. So it's a great place to be, except that we don't really do winter sports. So it's a lot easier for us to be able to rent our place out as a ski rental and, then be able to go somewhere else and stay there. And it ends up kind of balancing out really well. So for us, we're going to do that. We'll coach some camps while we're over in Spain and, basically be kind of continuing business as usual and, get back in April once the snow has melted.
Amazing. And do you use Airbnb to list those?
No, we actually do. With ours, we do kind of just one few month rental, and that's how we roll that because it's kind of a pain in the butt with Airbnb in our town.
Gotcha. Okay. Cool. So like a single group or person would rent for the season.
Yeah, exactly. I have very little interest in trying to run a proper Airbnb type thing. Having stayed in a lot of them, I know what work goes into having to constantly be cleaning and dealing with tenants and stuff. So. Yeah.
And we have our house here in St. Louis when we're traveling, it's on Airbnb, but we have a great manager who, we pay him pretty well, and he takes care of setting up the cleaning and the guest check-in. So yeah, you definitely, we run it like a business and we pay for that value.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we definitely would consider that if that was really a viable option. Unfortunately, in our area, they've cracked down pretty hard on Airbnb because it's a ski town. They really don't want people doing it. So You can't really, like short-term rentals are not a thing in our area because the the ski town really wants people staying in their specific stuff and their hotels. So
yeah, gotcha. Cool. Molly, is there anything else that we haven't touched on in regards to sponsorships that you'd like to share?
I think those are really my big things. We kind of covered a lot of them. I think ultimately, the first chapter is the most important one in my opinion, which is really just don't be a dick. Be nice to pretty much everyone that you interact with whenever possible. Even when that person is not your favorite human, you're never going to really be mad at yourself for, treating people with kindness and just trying to be, as smooth as humanly possible.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to think of if like every interaction is like a sponsor relation. You're like trying to, how can you over deliver in every interaction you have?
Exactly.
It'd be an interesting way to look at it. Yeah, love it. And so where you said it's easy to find you, where's the best place that people should look to learn more about your work?
Yeah, to find pretty much everything and links to everything, if you just go to theoutdooredit.com, that's kind of my main hub, and everything is sort of linked out from there. So yeah, that's the best place to get in touch. And yeah, I've had a lot of people message me already. I will say, having read that, they got the Athlete's Guide to Sponsorship, they read it and they did some of the things in it, and they've actually already, found sponsors, which is pretty cool and really, really nice to hear. So it definitely works. It takes work. It's not easy. It's a job, but it is possible at any level to find sponsors.
Which, I mean, I read this book and it's very straightforward. Like you could go get sponsors after reading this book. So that's why, I wanted to have you on the show. I saw you post about the book on Instagram, I think. And I was like, oh yes, like everybody needs to know this information if they're thinking about sponsorship. This is like the only book out there, I think.
Yeah, there were a couple in like the early 2000s. There's like one from the early 2000s, one from the 90s, but obviously things have changed a lot in the last 2 decades in terms of athlete sponsorship and even just, the business of like the wellness and health and fitness industry. So yeah, this is pretty much the only game in town for anything modern.
Great. Well, yeah, thank you for writing that. It's going to help a lot of people. And thanks for coming on the show. It's been a pleasure.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It was great to catch up.
Yeah, Molly. Talk to you soon. All right, another great episode with Molly Hurford. Molly, thank you so much. If you learned something in this episode that you find useful, or if you just learned something that was interesting to you that you never knew about the world of sponsorships and influencers and athletes and all these things, then please give Molly a shout out. Please thank her on her social media channels. And of course, if you found this stuff helpful, then chances are some of your friends or family will also. So please share it with them on your social media or send them a link to this episode. All right, and I want to tell you real quick a little bit more about the League of Superconductors. So on a practical business level, this program is going to help you get more coaching clients, fill your retreats, get more viewers and or listeners, help you sell more books. It's going to help you book speaking gigs and all of these pieces and how they all fit together. But all of this business stuff really is just fuel for what you're trying to create and change in the world. So we're going to be working on the high performance coaching aspect so you can be the leader to lead your movement. We're going to look at brain science, business strategy, marketing, sales, and we're also going to look at ancient wisdom and metaphysics and how the laws of the universe apply to what you're trying to do here at this moment on Earth. So if that sounds like something that you are interested in, I invite you to head over to derekloudermilk.com and you can apply for a call with me and tell you more about the program and see how exactly we can get you what you want. So derekloudermilk.com under the coaching tab, the League of Superconductors 2020, and you can apply on that page. All right. Thank you so much for listening. Now it's your turn to go out there and be adventurous.